Ty Terrell, my friend, dude. So pumped to get you back on the show.
Yes, sir.
I feel like we should just do this once a week over coffee. I would really enjoy that.
Perfect. I'm not quite
But
the coffee connoisseur you are. I would be. I'm an amateur. You're in the big leagues. I hear from our
well,
conversations.
if I move back east, I'm going to slowly convert you into being a coffee connoisseur slash snob.
Perfect. That's a challenge.
Hmm. It's
Love it.
worth it. It's worth it. All it takes is one really good cup of coffee, and then you can never go back.
Man, people that drink coffee seem happy. So maybe it's just
That's
something
true.
worth trying.
That's
Something
very
worth
true.
trying.
But let's just jump right into it today because we got about 45 minutes and we both got to run. And so I want to get as much out of this as we possibly can. And we're going to be talking velocity based training today. And in particular, using that to build a more powerful athlete. And so you and our mutual friend, Tony Giuliano, wrote like one of the best books I've seen on this topic. How
Appreciate
long
it.
ago? That was like a couple of years ago now,
Yeah,
right?
that was that's a good point. It might be five now. It might
Yeah.
be five. I was at iFast in when did I leave? 2018. So like July 2018. I feel like it was in my last 2 years there is when that happened. So it could be 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't even know.
So let's start with why you guys took this project on, because I think that in itself, I think will open up like a can of worms for us of
Sure.
why this is an important topic to get into.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's probably multiple layers to this. Like, to be honest, part of it was the environment of just being at iFast, and it's such a learn, like, it's just, no one like says, hey, you got to be learning, you got to be getting better, but there is definitely like a bar there and a level of intelligence and thinking about training, and it's just. And you're constantly thinking about training. How does this impact this? What's really happening there? And not just saying, hey, well, a textbook says this, and this is what a research article I read. So the environment, number one, like stimulates just curiosity and wanting to climb. And then two, you get, you're around a bunch of people who just are smart and pushing the envelope and are challenging you and challenging ideas. And so it's just kind of part of the culture that, there at the time. And so, velocity-based training was coming, was coming out. Read Brian Mann's book. I'd heard of, obviously push. We'd actually had a push come to the facility and do a demonstration. I was like, okay, I like what's going on here. I know, I'm kind of getting my toes wet, my feet wet in there. And Tony has a really good mind for just kind of analysis on things, and he helped with that. And when he gets on a project, he'll really push and he'll dive right in and really commit himself to it. And so at times I was trying to like, oh shoot, Tony's picking up pace on this. Okay, I better go. I was doing more coaching than him at that time. It's just the roles, and I felt he was new. He was a new coach, intern transition to coach, and so because of that, I had a lot of athletes, and I was just like, you know what, like, this is stuff that we've known. First of all, like, I want to kind of preface this with saying, like, the things that are like velocity-based training, like the concepts, like principles in it, are things that we've been around forever. Like, the technology just allows us to measure this stuff and enhance our depth of knowledge on it. We can be a little bit more definitive about our, test, retest stuff, cause and effect, kind of projections there. So, we know that, like, you look at a basketball player, like, and I was working with a lot of like what field and court sport athletes, so volleyball, basketball, baseball, tennis, things that require speed and kind of like high end athleticism. And do I need my 6'3" basketball point guard to deadlift 550? And the answer is probably no. And then you just start thinking, okay, like, well, what happens? Like, why do I see this really strong, athlete that's a little bit slower? They love the weight room, and also, like, this is more just an observation, and I'm not crapping on anything, but a lot of like typical traditional high school strength and conditioning programs are very football lifting based, because that's typically why the S&C program is started at a school. And football is a sport that you need mass, you need strength, you kind of need that armor on your body. And so a lot of athletes get funneled that don't play football into those sports. And so you see, like, this, again, like the 6'3", 185-pound point guard, like, man, you're getting slower. And why are you getting slower? You're getting stronger. And so it just kind of comes to the point of like everything has diminishing returns. And I have this conversation all the time because in our industry, you say, okay, well, this diet is the best, or this type of training is the best. Hot yoga is going to cure me. Intermittent fasting is going to do this. And it's like, yes, yes, and yes, no, no, and no. Like the truth is it's all pieces of the pie. It's all pieces of the puzzle. And you just have to, it takes the right dose, which I think dosage is part of this conversation, is a really cool concept that doesn't get talked about a lot, but it's hard to figure out dosage. It takes some trial and error sometimes, but you gotta, it's just everything is involved. Strength, yes, strength. You have to have a baseline level of strength. It gives you resiliency. It gives kind of oomph to power. Just whether you're talking mathematically in the equation or you're just talking, just like, hey, this is just what I see anecdotally. So after seeing some of the, just these observations, like, okay, these athletes don't necessarily need to be that strong. These athletes are doing a lot of heavy lifting, and I see them getting a little bit slower, and they're moving, not as well as maybe I want them to. Okay, where's the balance in all this? And we started making these kind of like just thinking about these athletes as like, not like actual profiles, but just in our head, like from an idea, conceptual standpoint, okay, a volleyball player should look like this. And if you build a spectrum of strength and speed, or force and velocity, where would they fall on that? So then in comes, exposure to VBT, and you're like, okay, I want to start playing with this, and one of the great things about working in the private sector and with, non-professional athletes, and I work, at IFAS, we work with both, professionally and non-professional, but you can explore with the non-professional a little bit athletes, and you're not hurting them, and you just don't put them in harm's way. They're still probably in a window of generalized training that like GPP that like, a lot will help them. So we took about 6 or 8 of our like, athletes that had like 4 or 5 years of training age, and were all of these were actually like D2 to D1 athletes, and they were committed. They were there for a long time. I knew they were coming back, when they weren't in season, and some of them trained in season, and so we had them for a long time, and we could do 2 to 3 years of kind of experimentation, and so we did, and it just was interesting, and we just kind of sat back and implemented some very simple, basic VBT concepts. Oh, let's train in this zone and see what happens. Let's train in this. And we tried to isolate the training stimulus so we could, kind of start to form some ideas about what's happening. You overlay that on top of just, the kind of theoretical training science that you read about, whether in pick a textbook, whether it's super training or on and on. And you start to form ideas, and then you experiment again. And at the end of this, as you go again, a couple years into this, the experimentation becomes pretty focal. And now you're starting to make some, again, we're not in a laboratory. So I would, this isn't going to have like a highly valid, like research, but like it's still training. I'm looking at front of me and like, okay, yeah, this guy had a, better output here, but his depth was terrible. So like, what happens when, you add weight, it changes these other variables. Okay, how does that change, the output, or how kind of the mechanisms of how they're getting through the movement. So it was pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the summary of all that. But that's where it started, and that was our mindset at the time. And you start, we were really driving pretty hard on it, reading, multiple research articles a day, coming back in, debating them, talking about them. The coolest thing about this was, I'm kind of rambling now, but the coolest thing about this was learning the relationship of the variables involved. So how does power and how is acceleration impacted by force, and the timing of all that kind of, and it kind of led me to like make this kind of like, vertical jump assembly line. So, you've got this, if we have a timeline from the beginning of the concentric phase to the toe off, you have this, okay, well, I've got a peak force moment at the beginning of the concentric phase, probably built up from the stress sorting cycle of the eccentric loading. And, then that, now we've got Newton's laws involved here now. So that, dictates the amount of acceleration, and then, that dictates the speed I can get up to. So like, velocity at takeoff, and then peak power, where's peak power occurring in all this window? Well, it's going to be at the sweet spot of force and velocity, you know, in that concentric movement. So, okay, so for some people it was right at 50%. For some it was 60% of the way through the concentric phase. For some it was earlier. And, you know, so that can even start to dictate, well, what kind of an athlete am I? If my peak power is happening at 40% of the way, well, I'm probably more of a force-based athlete. You know, I can't reach the high-end velocities to impact power mathematically on that end. Well, if it's happening at 60% of the way through, am I a slow, you know, do I have a slow RFD, or am I have a great, you know, RFD and I'm just able to hit higher velocities? You know, what now we're talking like muscle physiology and all, you know, stuff like that. So really cool things like that would just pop up, these questions. And it's just another way to kind of understand the science, the physics, and the physiology of what's going on. And I don't I don't have like this broad range of sciences that I'm good at or really enjoy. But when we're talking about things that impact performance, I absolutely will fall in love with those things. So physics, I'm absolutely in love with physics. I'm absolutely in love with most physiologies. You know, that again, that kind of all physiologies kind of, you know, impact performance, but specifically from an output standpoint, you know, and the traditional stuff, you know, neuromuscular things, just, you know, it was easy to dive in at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the really important points out of that is there is still this attitude a lot of times that the goal is just to keep getting our athletes stronger, right? The goal is just to keep getting stronger, right? Like I've talked to a lot of people, there are a lot of people listening to this, like, oh, I want to be like a better athlete. I want to be more powerful.
Yeah.
And then their metric for that is, oh, well, my squat's going up, my bench is going up, my deadlift's going up, so this must be working. It's like, well, maybe to a particular point on the front end.
Yes.
But like you said, there's a law of diminishing returns, and like just getting stronger is probably going to make you slower because it has to. Like there's just force velocity curve 101. If you want to generate maximal force, you got to move slow.
Yep.
Right. So there's a point of like, we need to give you enough strength so that you have some force in the equation, right? Like you need a force bucket. But once you're able to generate force, now it's a velocity based question of how rapidly can I actually tap into this force pool?
Yeah.
So the game is not just like continuously get stronger, which unfortunately is what you see at even like still really high levels of strength and conditioning. Like I've seen it at the collegiate level with incredibly high level athletes where it's like the conversation is still like, oh, we did our job this year. Guys are PR in their bench, they're PR in their squat. And I'm like, okay, well, what's their vertical doing? What's their broad jump doing? What's their 10-yard? Like, and those are the things that aren't changing. And I'm like, well, you're not really doing like
right. Because you have to measure. So this, I mean, there's so you talk. I mean, we could just take that little 2-minute snippet right there and unpack it. So I guess we can do it here. But one, as an industry, we have to choose what we're measuring as success better. Now, again, I'm just talking like field and court sport athletes because that's where I live. But like, and we can talk again, volleyball, basketball, whatever it is. But let's just say it's a basketball player. If I have someone who, like, in a training block, it may be that's designed to increase my squat numbers, right? It's okay to train within that, or to measure within that training block the difference, the improvement in squat. But if we're talking about, like, let's say an entire off-season program and how that's going to transfer and influence them on the court or in the sport, we have to start measuring things that are closer to their sport. And so, meaning, you know, how fast, how high they're jumping, how fast they're running, how quickly they're changing directions, you know. And this is a whole different conversation, but how we lift and what we lift impacts movement. And so we also have to be conscious of that, which brings me back to, you talk about getting stronger and you know, building, having a force production bucket. What we found was, one of the coolest things we found was athletes' peak force in a lift was not happening at their 1 rep max almost all the time. And I'll give you the caveat to that here in a second. It was happening somewhere between 70 and 90% of their 1 rep max. So basically what that says, it was happening at a weight that was heavy enough to promote, or, you know, a force production need, right, demand, right, and a great one. And it was heavy enough to slow you down enough to where you had time to produce these great amounts of force. But it was not so heavy that it just totally did two things. It wrecked the way you were, you know, kind of executing the lift, your motion of it. and it didn't slow you down so much that it negatively impacted the velocity,
the acceleration.
Yeah. And so the caveat to that is when, we had some like, football, like linemen in there and things like that. Do they need to be at the, on the velocity? No, they don't. They need to be guys. It's brute force. It's mano a mano. So like, their peak force was happening at their 1 rep max because everything leading up to that was already slow. So their 5 rep max was slow. Their 3 rep max was slow. So it was like, so they couldn't generate enough speed in any of their lifts, to have this great, acceleration and peak force moment. So it was happening at their 1 rep max. That's probably totally fine for a D tackle who needs to shove a guy backwards or shove a guy off of him and just brute force. Like I'm totally cool with that. He's moving in this little, 3 or 4 step box here, depending on how far he gets upfield or how, downfield he has to go. So those things, like, that is one of the big important pieces of this is like identify who's in front of you and what do they need. So that goes back to your testing, what you're measuring. It's like if I'm, a 200-meter sprinter, like, yes, and you think I need to get stronger. Yes, okay, my deadlift needs to get to 500 or whatever it is, right? But then why would I use the deadlift to measure my success in a sport that doesn't ask me to deadlift?
It's a means to an end as opposed to the end in and of itself.
100%. And so that was one of the main driving from just like an actual practical aspect and how we're viewing, our training and stuff like that. That was one of the things that VBT got their hooks in us because of just that concept right there. Now, I love the technology that's happening in sport. It's happening in our industry, but I also think that like technology is outpacing our understanding of the science. So we play with toys a lot of times instead of understanding, what's actually happening. So if I understand, and I'm not saying I do 100%, I work on this on a regular basis to try to further my understanding of these things, but like if I understand performance and the variables and the physics that go into performance, and the relationship of, unweighting phase and braking phase, or in the amortization phase, what should be happening here and what should be happening at the beginning of the concentric phase and on, then the technology piece is just something that I use to measure what I already understand. The flip side of that is Tony and I used the technology to learn the training science a little better, so while yes, we wanted to help our athletes, kind of the ugly secret is this was a very selfish time. We were 100% trying to learn this stuff better. And we used our athletes as guinea pigs for that. And now, honestly, they all got better, and you could say they could have gotten better without using it. Sure. But like we implemented this method, adjusted where we needed to, and they all got better. And a lot of them got dramatically better and was still moving well. And so that's what was really important to me.
Yeah, that's huge. And so what I would love to do is, because I like the distinction that you guys make of kangaroos versus gorillas. Mm-hmm. So I would love to get into distinguishing these two populations.
Yep.
Am I a kangaroo? Am I a gorilla? And then what are the implications in terms of how would you then train those two populations differently?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to this question here, right? So you have to identify who you are athletically, and which is the kangaroo or the gorilla. Then you have to identify what your sport is asking of you. Which one do you need to be? And if you're a kangaroo and you're working and you're living in a gorilla sport,
you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, so relocate.
That's similar to the gorilla that wants to go run a 4.4.
Good luck, yeah. And I hope it's downhill because that might be the only way you
with
get
wind at your back.
Right. And so
on one of the things in the airport, like the little
well, those are my favorite things.
I know. I'm like, yeah, I'll run a 40 on this. Let's go right now.
Oh man, nothing can boost your confidence like one of those things. Mm-hmm. And so those are the 2 questions that you have to ask, as far as to kind of determine the direction that you need to go in your training with these athletes. So if I have a kangaroo and they play volleyball, they're probably in the right spot. Now, there are some...
Well, can I back you up just real quick before we go there? Can we back that up one step just to say, how do you actually distinguish like someone listening that's like, I want to try to figure out, am I a kangaroo or am I a gorilla?
Honestly, there's I mean, there's like, I don't think there's a one way to do it. Like if you, okay, so example, where the power occurs in someone's counter movement jump, peak power. So that's one example, right? Of just, if you have a piece of technology that can show you that, if it's below 50%, I believe you're probably a gorilla. If it's above the 50% mark, as far as like the distance in the concentric phase from, the beginning of it to toe off, that's another way to measure it. You can look at, if you're someone who makes force velocity profiles or force velocity curves, you can look at like, where that's, kind of, is it more shaded towards the slower side and high force? Well, that's a gorilla. Is it more shaded towards the velocity side? That's a kangaroo. For field and court sport athletes, if you want a good force velocity curve, meaning we want like, you got to have speed, quickness, so basically you want like a velocity based power, kind of profile. You kind of want to be, over to the right or as far down the velocity spectrum as you can go with, at least a moderate to high force output. So you're trying to live, if velocity is on the, the horizontal axis and force is on the vertical axis, you're trying to live in this like upper right quadrant, which would be, as close to this upper right quadrant as possible. That would be like the ideal, kind of profile for a field and court sport athlete. Now, if you're, let's say you're, that football lineman, you kind of want that upper left quadrant, which is not a high velocity, but a short, a boatload of force there. So you can look at it, that way. Tony and I in our manual, we have a little calculation. If I'm being like fully transparent, like it made sense to us at the time. We checked it with a couple different professors that, biomechanics professors, and it made sense to them. Again, I don't know if you put it in like, in a validity test that it would, I don't know how it's, when I don't want to devalue what it is, it proved to be, really helpful for us and guide and almost always, correct. I can't really think of a time it wasn't, but I'm sure, I don't want to say it's definitive, and be wrong there. So those are different ways. Another really cool way is, I believe that like the 1.0 meters per second point, which is the mid ground between strength power and strength speed and speed strength. So it's kind of the centerpiece of power. I've always believed that mark was a dividing line. And so if you did a power curve on somebody, like it's like a bell curve, and depending on where they fell relative to that 1.0 might give you an indication too. So those are, I mean, conceptually, that's
there are a lot of ways you can do it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm like giving you like a really great answer that like the listeners can be like, oh, this is what I'm going to implement.
Well, could you do it doing like a jump and then take away the loading phase in a jump? So like,
do a jump versus jump.
Do a vertical jump and then do a seated jump off of a box, and then look at like a difference between those two. Like, that's probably the easiest, roughest, like back of the napkin way for someone to get an idea pretty quickly.
Old school, like, if you've got like a jump mat or something like that, or you just do height, if you want to do just like, jump height or whatever, if you have like a vertex or something, you can measure, vertical jump. And like, I think like a lot of this stuff, well, we need technology. The truth is you don't, like, kind of the, explosive strength deficit or something like that, kind of ratio that you're talking about can be effective for sure. Anytime there's a ratio, there's always, going to be a little bit of holes in it because, in a ratio, like to really, both sides can change, I guess is what I'm saying. And so like, you can maintain a ratio, but like both sides can kind of move in the same direction, but that may not be indicative of what you really, want to happen or what is really happening. So, basically, but they're a guiding force more so than anything. And that's where like, I wouldn't get caught up on, I don't want to say like the validity of things, but like, because, you want things to be, scientifically valid, but I'm talking about more so like, if we're using these things as decision-making guides versus like actually trying to do, laboratory research, then it's different, so decision-making guides don't have to be 100% perfect. They just need to be internally valid, meaning like, within your process, they need to be, help guide you in an accurate way. Yeah. And so you could absolutely do that. And there's a lot of old school research on that stuff about if the deficit between the no counter movement jump versus counter movement jump is greater than 10%, then, you maybe have a gorilla, or, a kangaroo and the other way around. So, so that's definitely a way to do that. But just, I guess the kind of, asterisk there I just would put on it is just using it as a guiding, metric or a guiding force rather than a definitive, this is what's happening, so, and what I mean by that, so let's say my counter movement jump, I touched 30 inches, and then my, seated jump, I touched, 25 inches. And if they both go up to, 3 inches, whatever, then, after the first training block, that the ratio is going to be the same, but I got improvement. So it's, it's not like you didn't go anywhere, but relative to, your profile as an athlete, you didn't change, as far as relative, one versus the other. So that's a really easy concept to do that for sure. And, once you've decided what you have, who you are, from there it gets, I don't want to say it gets easy, but the roadmap is kind of written for you. Then we just get into coaching. If you have a way to actually create profiles, you can kind of geek out and you can get very specific and accurate. If you don't, you can ballpark it. If you don't want to make profiles and you have technology, you can still ballpark this stuff and just kind of observe and be willing and able to make adjustments over time. With where they need to be, what zones they need to be in. But to go back to the, if I'm a volleyball player and a kangaroo, it's if we're talking velocity zones, do I really need to spend much time in the absolute strength? Now, I'm a big proponent of, I think touching plus 90% from time to time is really helpful for you. I think there's a lot of good adaptations that come from that. But getting to dosage, how much time do I really need to spend there? And so if I'm a volleyball player, I'm probably doing a lot of my lifting at, in the, strength speed and, in speed strength zone. Volleyball players, because they tend to be, it could be basketball players, tennis players, whatever, but because they tend to be on the speed strength side of things, they need kind of what they don't have, right? And that's, novel concept, right? Train what you
fill the empty bucket.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so, I might start, if I've got a volleyball player, they're in the speed strength, kind of bucket, I might start their strength training, quote unquote, could be strength speed. So I might start at 0.75, and then, then we slowly work our way down to maybe 0.5, which is going to be kind of the bottom of accelerative strength and when absolute strength starts to come into the situation. So personally, if I have a volleyball player, I don't know how much, again, the majority of my time would be spent in this kind of accelerative strength speed zone, because that's what they don't have. And then you work your way back up the velocities to the speed strength stuff. And you could do, contrast stuff, and kind of do it concurrently in there and get some really good, training effects from that. But that's kind of how I would, one, you identify any of those ways that you can. We've talked about a couple. And then two, take what you have in front of you, a kangaroo, gorilla, and start moving away from their strength towards their weakness. And what you'll see is, so let's say I'm a kangaroo, and if we're just talking force velocity curves, you'll start to see a curve that could go to the right, could really go to the far end of velocity, but didn't go very high, meaning they don't have a lot of force output. You'll start to see that curve lift up. You'll start to see it get higher. And then after, getting stronger. And then if you follow that up with a power phase, or you start moving close, back down or back up the velocity sections to some speed strength stuff, you'll not only see that curve be elevated, but then you'll see it move to the right. So now you're going to have higher force output at higher velocities, which for field and court sport athletes is almost all of them what they want. Wide receiver, cornerback, basketball player, volleyball, it doesn't matter. Tennis, if you need to be fast, lacrosse, and if you need to be fast and powerful, you want to be living up in that upper right quadrant. And what I have found is that I don't know how accurate, I don't know how smart this is or whatever, but like force production is the key to all of it. And so we found that force production had a greater influence on power than velocity did, even though mathematically nothing says that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know what to make of that, but I always saw that consistently. And I was like, okay. So basically it kind of came to me like, you have to find a way to account for the athlete's force production. You have to address that first, and then move from there. And there's tons of research that show like power phases have better results if they're preceded by a strength phase. Okay, so and there's a lot of things, science that goes into that too, and so you get the neural adaptations. There's muscle muscle physiology adaptation, stuff like that. So if you can address force production on the athlete first, then move towards, the faster speeds, you're going to put somebody in the upper right quadrant. But with the kangaroo or with the gorilla, they already have this force production. They're really strong, but they need force production at certain speeds. Meaning they probably need to be able to produce force at a little bit faster speed than they do already. So they still need force production. They just need to be able to produce it faster. So now it becomes an RFD issue within the time constraint that the sport puts on it. Mm-hmm. And so you're still addressing force production, but now it's a time constraint force production issue versus just a total
force production.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice because it's like, if you think of picturing like that force velocity curve, mm-hmm. what it's essentially doing is telling you where to start and then which direction to go.
Yeah.
Like over the course of a training block.
Yep.
Right. And which is like, if you're a coach, that's what you're looking for. Cause like perfection, I don't think is going to be ever a thing in our industry.
No.
Maybe not for a long time, at least, until like we keep uncovering more and more of the science, but
sure.
Right. Like as an athlete, if you can understand this is one of the buckets I fall into, mm-hmm. so I'm going to start here and then I'm going to move towards the velocity side of the curve, yep. or maybe I'm going to start here and move towards the force side of the curve. Mm-hmm. Just that distinction will make a huge difference in like the progress that you're able to make and your ability to become a more powerful athlete.
And where you start on the velocity spectrum matters. And this is another thing I found. So if my peak force, so let's say at 0.7 meters per second, my peak force is produced there. And if I go to 0.6 meters per second, then I get a drop in peak force production. So that 0.7, what that's telling me is at 0.7 meters per second, that's my kind of ideal place for force production. The combination of I can still move fast but there's enough weight to make me produce force. So what we did is we started at that kind of peak force moment and tried to move, if they were a kangaroo and needed better force production, we tried to move them down the line to slower speeds and higher weights gradually. Mm-hmm. And so instead of just throwing them into the deep end of the pool to somewhere where they couldn't be successful, why would you put your athlete somewhere they can't be successful? And in this particular situation, I'm defining success as producing peak force. So we just like, why would we put them anywhere else? Plus from a training adaptation standpoint, like you're probably going, this is theoretical, but like you're probably going to get a better training adaptation where you're getting the greatest stimuli. And there's no greater stimuli in that moment than the place you produce peak force. So if you're away from that, you're getting a lesser stimuli than you're wanting, in that moment. And you're probably going to get an adaptation that you don't want. Yep. And so where you choose to put them on that velocity spectrum matters, and then just slowly, gradually move. The cool thing was we found that the nervous system adapted real quickly. Like we could change the velocities every 2 weeks. And so we could move them higher, slower or faster about every 2 weeks, and the athlete would change with it. So the neural components of this change really fast. And we know the nervous system to be a quickly adapting system. And so, it was really cool. And kind of, we talked about dosage earlier, and I know we're kind of pushing up against this here, but like one of the main things is about VBT is that you don't have to do the trial and error of dosage to some degree, right? Like the auto regulation component of using velocity based training is a massively powerful benefit of that technology. So I don't have to guess if I'm loading them too much or if we've done too many sets or too many reps. If you can't get the velocity that is prescribed by the coach at that load, then you change.
Yeah,
you know,
if you load, need then you change the load.
Right. You know, or if you say, hey, I'm hell bent. If you decide I want to stay at this load for whatever reason your reasoning is, then we're just done. You know, if you got 4 sets of 5 at 0.65 meters per second, and that's what was prescribed today, and you got 2 reps of your 5th set to meet that, and you couldn't meet it the last 3 reps, then you're done. You know, so now we don't overtrain. We give the right amount of dosage with the right stimuli, and then I squatted athletes hard, or deadlift, whatever we were doing. Like, we went hard 3 days a week with like lower body stuff on that, which was, you know, a lot of times you would find like the way we traditionally load would maybe bury an athlete over time. But because of the auto regulation component of VBT, you know, I didn't have to worry about that. So you get more training in the same amount of time. You get the desired stimulus, you get auto regulation, so you don't have to worry about if you're overtraining or fatigue or things like that. And the technology does so much of the work for you. You just have to, one, identify the athlete, identify where to start them at on the velocity spectrum, and then appropriately dose and pay attention.
Yeah, and then just gradually move them in the direction that they need.
You're right.
Like, I think conceptually, the example of starting at, say, like 0.7, right? Like, you just want to use that as an arbitrary number, right? If you start at 0.7 and you have a kangaroo, then maybe every 2 weeks you're going to drop velocities because you're trying to help them fill the force bucket more. Whereas if you have a gorilla and say you start at 0.7 again, right? Like, I'm going to slowly increase velocities every 2 weeks.
Exactly.
And it helps take the guesswork out of what we're doing.
And this is also too, like, if you want to, you can augment these reps here. Like, this is where band resisted and band assisted stuff can come into play, right? If you have a gorilla that just can't quite get out of the mud, assist them, you know, use that. I mean, like, I'll put the arms, the arms on a squat rack that come out. And so, like, you can do rack pulls or whatever from there. Like, I'll put a band around both of those arms so they can sit into it. And if someone needs to be assisted, they can still hold the weight. They can goblet squat, zercher, back squat, whatever. And they'll just sit to the band pushes them out of there. And, you know, if I need someone that can, has a hard time coming out of the bottom of the squat or bottom of a jump, or even can't get to the depth that we want them to, unweighting them or assisting them in that moment can be powerful to impacting their force velocity curve. And the same thing for resisted. Like, if I've got someone who can't produce force at later stages in the concentric phase, I think band resist is a great option as long as they can produce it early, because it allows you to, because it decelerates your concentric phase for you. The band is resisting you, so it's actively slowing you down. It allows you to continue to produce force, recruit high threshold motor units, and so you get a lot of muscle activation later in the concentric phase. Now, if I've got a gorilla, or anybody really, but I may add a decent amount of band tension and then slowly take the band tension away, and then make sure as I'm checking the GymAware dashboard, which I'm partial to GymAware, but like, I just think they have a phenomenal dashboard. I haven't used others, but like, I just had a lot of good, success with that one. And we would look at the dashboard just to say, like, okay, are they, as I take the band resistance away, are they still producing that force later in the concentric phase? And if the answer is yes, then we know we're doing it right. If the answer is no, then maybe they need to be assisted. They still need, to be able to kind of get out of that mud and get moving through there. And so, no, I just you can play with the physics of all this, I guess, was the point that I'm making there, and kind of dive into it. And in our manual, I'm not trying to pump this, but like, there is some really cool.
No, like, people should go buy it. It's it's $19.99. Like, it's
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was Dan. Like, there was some really cool. I think Dan Baker, but I don't want to if I'm giving him credit that he doesn't deserve, I apologize. But they did research on even how much band tension should be on there. and it's, between 10 and 25% of your, I can't remember if it's of the load on the bar or your 1 rep max. I can't remember what it was. So like, there was phenomenal, guidance right there for us in how much to use. And there's some guidance in there on that. There's, I don't even know how many references. If you guys want, I think there might be 100 references in there. I mean, maybe, I don't know, 60 to 100. I know it's a broad range, but, and there's some case studies, and we were very open and honest about the results, the cause and effect of what we did. I mean, I got nothing, we got nothing to hide. Our intent was not to make money off this, and I can promise you we're not getting rich off of that manual. But like, it just the intent was just to put it out there and say, hey, this is what we did. We didn't have a practical guide for VBT yet that I was aware of. It was a lot of research. It was a phenomenal book by Brian, but I felt like this was like a next step for us, or at least it filled that void for us at iFasting, me and Tony.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so, I mean, I'll piggyback on that. Like, one of the things that I really like is that it makes the implementation, execution far simpler and easier. Like, I'm at a point now where I think that just loose theory is really overrated. A lot of people love to live in loose theory realm, but that doesn't help. That doesn't help. Like, that doesn't help me at all, because I have to sit around and figure out how to implement it. Like, I'm looking for somebody to say, here's how to catch a fish, but then I'm also just going to give you the fish. Like, I want both. And that's what I think you guys do a good job of, is you get the theory, but then like, there's also like, hey, like, here's how to just like implement and execute this thing to be really successful, to help yourself become a more powerful athlete.
I appreciate that. And honestly, that's how I learned too. Like, I mean, we're not trying to be given the answers, but like, I can't read a book and immediately apply that stuff. Like, but if I see what it is in front of me and I can experience it, I can learn it. So like, I guarantee there's flaws in that thing. I guarantee, I don't know what they are, but I guarantee it. But what it is it's like you said, it's an example of how to apply. It's an explanation of the science that meets us where we're at as an industry, I feel. And it's a guide, it's a starting spot, it's a platform. And so, not to be corny here, but use that platform and then explore, because I mean, the next 10 years, there's going to be some of the amazing research come out, and we're going to learn, infinitely more than we did in the previous 10 years. That's just the way things are going at the rate. So, I mean, use it as a platform, explore yourself, add to it, prove us wrong, please, all of it.
Beautiful, man. I love it. Well, I know that I got to run to jump on a Zoom call with some of our athletes. I know you've got to run. You guys got a game today, I'm sure.
We do.
But dude, thank you so much for coming on board. This is fun. Fun as always. It's always good to get just a
conversation with you is never a bad thing. Never a bad way to spend time. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, man, for sure. So if anybody listening to this, like, wanted to track you down, find you, what's the best place for them to potentially reach you?
I try to stay anonymous. I mean, I think I say this every time. I don't really use social media.
Good for you, dude. I hate social media.
Yeah, I know. You can always email me at tylterrell@gmail.com. If you want to buy the manual, it's on, I think it's completesportperformance.com.
Yeah, we'll throw a link to that in the show notes so people can find it really easily.
That's about it. I mean, I prefer having conversations with people than seeing what's being posted. So, if you want to have a conversation, reach out.
Awesome. Ty, man, thank you so much. And everybody listening, have a great week.
Thank you, James. We'll see you, bud.
All right. Done. Easy.